In today's video, we'll be looking at 5 encounters with big cats that turned fatal, from a lone trekker in the mountains of Nepal to a quiet farmer in Argentina defending his livestock at dawn. But first, in Oregon, a mother of 4 walked into her backyard and crossed paths with a mountain lion that didn't hesitate. It was October 9th, 2018, outside Ashland, Oregon. The morning was still, the air faintly metallic from weeks of wildfire residue that clung to the ridge above town. Sunlight cut through thin smoke haze as Melissa Crane stepped into her backyard to collect laundry, a normal chore that began like any other. Melissa Crane was 34, a stay-at-home mother of 4. She had lived in that modest, pale green house for 6 years, part of a quiet cul-de-sac where kids played basketball in driveways, and everyone knew who baked the best banana bread. Her husband, David, worked part-time at a warehouse. They budgeted carefully but kept weekends free for family picnics near Emigrant Lake. Melissa was the type to wave to passing cars, to bring soup when someone was sick. After wildfires swept through the nearby ridge that summer, she'd started hanging laundry outside again, convinced it would help air out the smoky smell still trapped in clothes. In early October, the forest behind their home looked half-burned, half-reborn. Charred trunks rose from a slope of brown needles, but deer had already returned, grazing near the edge of development. That same change had drawn something else. A large male mountain lion, displaced and starving, had been sighted by 2 residents walking dogs at dawn. County Animal Control received the reports but couldn't respond quickly. Resources were tied up handling livestock losses elsewhere. Melissa had read the posts on the neighborhood page about a thin cat seen near the ridge, but brushed it off. They lived in Oregon. It wasn't unusual to see wildlife, she reasoned. Mountain lions can reach 8 feet in length and weigh over 120 pounds. They hunt alone, preferring ambush from cover, and normally avoid humans entirely. But when prey grows scarce, they move closer to settlements, following deer corridors or creeks that cut through suburban growth. Biologists later noted this male showed signs of advanced tooth wear and malnutrition, factors that increase risk-taking behavior. Once a predator starts seeking easy prey, it crosses an invisible threshold, the difference between cautious survival and desperation. 3 days before the attack, a neighbor found the half-eaten carcass of a deer less than 100 yards from Melissa's fence. Another heard guttural calls echoing through the ridge at dawn. At 10:45 a.m. on October 9th, Melissa's youngest, 6-year-old Chloe, was making a peanut butter sandwich when she saw movement by the laundry line. The sheets lifted once, twice, like someone walking behind them. A neighbor across the street, home on sick leave, recalled hearing a faint clatter, clothespins dropping to the ground. At 11:07 a.m., the first scream cut through the still air. The neighbor, Thomas Beck, said it came in 3 bursts, short, strained, then abruptly silenced. When he ran outside, he saw a blur of movement near the fence, light-colored fabric, then a shadow shifting through the laundry. Melissa had stepped between her child and the direction of the noise, instinctively blocking the doorway. The lion lunged through a weak panel in the fence, claws catching on the wood as it forced through. The attack unfolded within a space no larger than a small patio. Beck saw the struggle, but couldn't cross the street fast enough. Melissa's husband, returning early from work, heard shouting before he even turned onto their block. He jumped from his truck with a shovel, swinging toward the animal as it pinned Melissa near the base of a maple tree. Witnesses described the lion's movements as erratic, biting, retreating, circling again. Melissa's screams were sharp but fading. The sound of the metal shovel striking the fence carried down the street. Another neighbor banged a broom on her railing, yelling to scare it off. For a moment, the lion backed away, tail low, panting. Then, driven by either hunger or confusion, it lunged again. The final moments were fast and silent. David Crane later told investigators he remembered the animal's eyes catching sunlight, the color of amber glass. When he struck again, the shovel handle broke in two. When deputies arrived, the cat had already vanished into the ridge. Melissa lay unresponsive beside her overturned basket, a white sheet half buried in ash. Her daughter had locked herself inside. Tracks and drag marks led toward a drainage ditch before fading. Rangers found the underweight lion days later, euthanized it, and confirmed starvation. Coverage stayed minimal. The ridge in Oregon settled back into silence, but in another corner of the world, silence means something else. Not safety, but a signal that something higher in the mountains is still watching. It was February 2nd, 2015, in the Annapurna region of Nepal. The morning light had just begun to rise over the snow-covered ridges, cutting through mist that rolled like slow smoke across the valleys. The storm that had passed 2 days earlier left the air thin and unnervingly still. Arun Tamang, 29, was a schoolteacher from the lower Mustang Valley who took short solo treks whenever weather allowed. The mountains were familiar to him, not as a climber, but as a villager's son who grew up hearing wind through prayer flags. He was modest, known for fixing lanterns during festivals and sharing extra blankets with slower trekkers. When his school closed for a week in February due to heavy snow, he planned a simple one-day hike to check his family's old grazing shelter before spring. That winter was severe. Repeated storms drove herds from high pastures early, and snow lay deep across the foothills. Goat carcasses marked avalanche paths, and villagers whispered about leopards roaming near homes, lean, hungry animals following livestock corridors. Shepherds pulled their flocks closer to villages, leaving the upper trails silent. When Arun set out at first light, the danger felt remote. He wore a blue jacket, carried a small pack, and expected to return by dusk. The slopes below Manang were a mosaic of frost and rock. Each step broke through thin crusts of ice as avalanches rumbled faintly in the distance. Overhead, a few crows circled a narrow gully, the only sign of movement in a still white valley. Leopards are solitary predators, averaging around 4 feet in body length and weighing up to 140 pounds. Built for stealth, they move with padded silence, their spotted coats blending easily into forest and scrub. They prefer deer and smaller mammals, but will scavenge or hunt livestock when natural prey is scarce. In famine winters, older or injured leopards can take greater risks, venturing near villages or following isolated travelers along wooded paths. Unlike lions, they don't roar before attacking. Their strikes are fast, quiet, and close range. 3 days before Aaron's trek, shepherds reported finding fresh paw prints near a steep col known for wind drifts. The tracks were deep, spread far apart, a sign of a heavy animal moving fast. One porter mentioned hearing strange coughing calls after dusk, the kind leopards use to locate mates or warn rivals. Locals advised travelers to move in pairs and avoid dawn routes when snow crust is loud enough to betray steps. Arun had heard the talk, but dismissed it. His route was short, the trail familiar, and weather forecasts promised a brief window of calm before the next front moved in. By mid-morning, the light had shifted, flattening the shadows. The snow softened further, forcing slower progress. Near a narrow ridge, Arun's footprints veered off the main trail toward a rock outcrop overlooking a frozen gully, likely to rest or take shelter from gusting wind. That was where searchers later found evidence of his pack and a small indentation in the snow. One porter, climbing the next day, reported hearing a low, rasping growl near that same ledge and spotting a flash of blue before it vanished under drifting powder. The sequence that followed was pieced together from tracks, claw marks, and drag lines visible beneath thin crust. Evidence showed the leopard had approached from above, using the slope's natural cover. The first strike likely knocked Arun face down. Compact depressions suggested the cat's forepaws landed on his shoulders. A small scatter of gear, a glove, a flashlight, a torn pack strap, showed brief resistance. In predator analysis, the attack matched a hunger-driven ambush rather than territorial defense. The animal bit and held, attempting to subdue prey heavier than usual. Struggle signs extended no more than 10 feet downslope before the drag marks began, leading to a shallow depression partially covered by snow. The leopard's caching behavior was precise. It had pulled snow and loose debris over the body, intending to return later. The scrape was shallow, only a few inches deep, with distinct paw imprints along the rim. The attacker's tracks continued uphill before disappearing over a cornice. Searchers found no blood trail beyond the site, meaning the leopard likely left once disturbed by noise from the search party. One shepherd who helped the volunteers said he saw movement in the upper rocks at dawn, a silhouette crouched, tail flicking once before slipping out of view. When rescuers reached the site on the second day, shifting snow had already hidden much of it. Arun's blue jacket was found partially frozen against the slope, one sleeve extended outward as if reaching. His camera, found several feet away, held a final photo showing fog rolling through the valley. No animal visible, only the blurred horizon. Rangers documented the evidence and confirmed a leopard based on track width and caching pattern. News of the death stayed local. Authorities issued brief warnings, but withheld details to avoid concern among trekkers. A small funeral was held, and his students sent prayer flags to the ridge. Conservationists cited hunger, not aggression, as the cause. By late February, villagers lit night fires and carried whistles. When spring came, meltwater erased the prints, and the ridge fell silent again. From the thin air of the Himalayas to the dense sprawl of Mumbai, the terrain changes, but the pattern doesn't. When wild boundaries fade, predators adapt faster than people expect. It was March 21, 2017, in Thane district, Maharashtra. The city was still waking when mist hung over half-built apartment towers, and stray dogs rummaged through scattered trash. Beyond the main road, a low elementary school sat between a drainage canal and a narrow strip of woodland that had once been part of a larger forest. Sunita Patel was 42, a school janitor and caretaker. She lived 3 blocks away in a rented one-room flat with her sister's family. Known for her reliability, she arrived every morning before sunrise to sweep the courtyard and unlock the classrooms. The school served the nearby workers' children, small, brightly painted rooms surrounded by a concrete wall only 5 feet high. Sunita liked the quiet before the day began, often talking with the gate guard as she worked. She had been with the school for 9 years, proud that it stayed clean and orderly despite the crumbling drains and wild brush along its rear boundary. The neighborhood where she worked was a typical edge zone of Mumbai's urban sprawl, partly concrete, partly forest. A drainage channel ran behind the school, connecting to a series of culverts and overgrown storm pipes that led toward the Sanjay Gandhi National Park boundary. In the past decade, leopards had begun appearing more frequently in these in-between spaces, drawn by feral dogs and easy scavenging near garbage sites. It was not unusual for residents to hear growls at night or find paw prints in mud after heavy rain. Leopards are India's most adaptable big cats, capable of surviving in dense forest or crowded suburb. An adult male can weigh up to 150 pounds and leap more than 20 feet in a single bound. They hunt primarily at night, using cover and silence to ambush prey, then vanish before dawn. In cities like Mumbai and Thane, They feed mostly on stray dogs and pigs, occasionally venturing into residential zones when food is scarce. They are wary of humans, but unpredictable when startled or cornered. A bright light, sudden movement, or noise can turn avoidance into confusion and aggression. The week before the incident, residents reported seeing a leopard on CCTV near a roadside tea stall less than half a mile from the school. It had been following the drainage line, a convenient corridor for wild animals moving through developed areas. Municipal crews were aware of one open grate awaiting repair behind the school's wall, but work had stalled. The headmistress discussed delaying early classes, but decided against it after assurances from local ward officers that the park rangers were monitoring the situation. On the morning of March 21st, the street outside the school was quiet, except for 2 vendors setting up their carts and a few parents walking children to the gate. At 6:12 a.m., security footage later reviewed by authorities showed movement in the drain behind the compound. A leopard emerged, crouched low, then slipped through the open channel into the schoolyard. The guard on duty, Rajesh Mehta, had just unlocked the outer gate when he noticed the animal near the courtyard edge. His shouted warning startled both the leopard and Sunita, who was sweeping the far end of the yard near a row of planters. Witnesses said the animal froze for several seconds, its ears twitching toward the noise before lunging in Sunita's direction. The distance between them was less than 30 feet. The leopard cleared it in a single rush, colliding with her before she could step back. Mehta grabbed a plastic chair and swung it, shouting for help. The commotion drew attention from a vegetable vendor and 2 parents just outside the gate. One of them began recording on a phone as the leopard turned erratically, pinning Sunita to the ground. The animal's movements appeared confused. It bit, released, then crouched again as the group threw stones and shouted. In under a minute, it retreated toward the drain, tail low, and disappeared the same way it came. When the noise subsided, the guard and bystanders ran to where Sunita had fallen. The broom was still clutched in her hand, broken near the middle. She had no time to call out. Police arrived within 15 minutes, followed by Forest Department officers. The footage from the security camera captured the entire event. A flicker of motion, a blur of spotted fur, and a few indistinct seconds before the frame shook as the guard ran to help. Authorities traced paw prints through the drain and confirmed they matched a male leopard known to range along the park's edge. By mid-afternoon, tranquilizer teams set traps near the canal, but caught nothing. 2 nights later, the same leopard was captured after triggering a cage baited with a stray dog. It was identified, sedated, and relocated to a wildlife reserve outside Nashik. Officials described it as healthy but undernourished. News coverage remained brief, a few short articles citing human-wildlife overlap and warnings to residents near drain corridors. The school closed for 2 days, then reopened with temporary guards and new drainage covers welded into place. Sunita's sister collected her last month's wages quietly at the municipal office. In cities, encounters end as quickly as they begin. But in the open wild, the hours stretch longer, and one mistake in the dark can erase the difference between routine and fatal. It was August 14th, 2017, in a protected reserve in southern Kenya. The night smelled of dust and diesel, a low wind moving across the scrub between acacia clumps. Headlamps from distant vehicles glowed like slow-moving fireflies along the park road. Elsewhere, the land was dark and patient. Joseph Juma was 36, a night ranger on the park's anti-poaching unit. He had spent half his life in these patrols, learning to read spoor and silence the way others read newspapers. He preferred foot patrols because they left less noise and could catch poachers who slipped past roadblocks. He supported a small extended family, a wife, 2 children, and an elderly mother, and carried their expectations with him every shift. Joseph was careful, but decisive. He often moved alone for tactical reasons, believing a lone footprint drew less suspicion than a convoy. That habit, learned from years on the beat, made his field judgments swift and sometimes thinly hedged. Fellow rangers knew him for spotting snares and freeing trapped animals. That night his sector had seen odd buffalo movements, herds veering off their normal paths, and a rise in snare recovery. Radio chatter mentioned a suspected poacher sighting near a dry riverbed and occasional lion roars that sounded closer than usual. Joseph volunteered to push a foot route through a narrow corridor where tracks and fresh dung suggested activity. His intent was to investigate and mark ambiguous signs for the motor patrol later that morning. The ground was uneven with termite mounds and soft sand, tall grass shifting under moonlight along a ridge above a dry gully. On nights like this, sound traveled oddly, a clipped bark or a distant engine carried, then died. The combination of bush, dune, and broken ground both hid and amplified movement. It was the kind of terrain where a predator could close to within 20 to 30 feet without being seen until the last moment. Lions are large, social predators. An adult male can weigh over 400 pounds and deliver crushing force with jaws and forepaws. Males in the area are known for long patrols and for investigating any disturbance near kills or recent scavenging. When a lion is guarding meat or investigating other predators, it will stand its ground and, if surprised at close range, can respond with rapid, forceful strikes intended to immobilize. Their tactics involve heavy forepaw swipes and bites to the head or neck. In low light, they rely on close contact rather than long chases. Warnings that night were thin but present. Radio traffic referenced an errant jeep spotted by a boundary post an hour earlier. A senior ranger told the shift to avoid lone investigations where buffalo or lion activity was reported. Joseph acknowledged the warning on his radio but moved up the corridor anyway, deciding that a quick visual check could resolve the uncertainty before daybreak. He carried a standard-issue radio, a flashlight, and a short baton. He did not call for backup because he judged that moving quietly would be less likely to alert poachers. That judgment matched the standard operating culture. Quick, quiet checks were common. But it reduced immediate help if things went wrong. At approximately 2 a.m., Joseph followed a fresh set of tracks into a narrow clearing. His own footprints were the last human marks for the next several yards. A colleague on vehicle patrol heard sporadic radio static, and then a single abrupt call before transmissions cut out. The vehicles moved toward the sector but were slowed by soft sand and the need to avoid making noise that could scatter suspects. A handheld thermal camera later recovered from a teammate's kit recorded distant heat signatures and a single burst of movement coinciding with the abrupt radio cutoff. When the motor patrol reached the clearing minutes later, they found scattered gear, a broken torch, and a pair of boots abandoned in the grass. What investigators reconstructed from tracks and signs was a close contact encounter. Follow-up trackers found deep claw gouges in hard-packed soil and scuff marks, indicating the lion had grappled at ground level. The pattern of bite marks on clothing and the positioning of dragged equipment suggested Joseph had been knocked to the ground, pinned, and bitten in a short, violent sequence intended to subdue. Witnesses who arrived soon after described hearing roaring and a chorus of low, angry growls in the distance. One ranger's body camera caught intermittent audio, a long, guttural roar followed by a faded scramble of sand and a distant light. The animal did not drag the victim far. The evidence indicated it guarded the immediate area, then retreated uphill when vehicle lights and human voices approached. Medical and forensic teams later noted that the wounds were consistent with a defensive encounter around a possible kill or carcass rather than an unprovoked stalking. Scattered bones and recent scavenging signs were found nearby, pointing to either a buffalo carcass or a large scavenged kill that would justify a lion holding its ground. Terrain slowed response times and complicated extraction. Soft sand and narrow tracks kept vehicles from reaching the exact point quickly. The radio cutout and timing matched a sudden close-range surprise rather than a prolonged hunt. The park classified the report and tightened patrol rules. No solo tracking, mandatory partner checks, and 5-minute radio calls. Coverage stayed minimal, focused on safety updates. Joseph's family received quiet support, and a brief memorial was held at the post. The site was later marked with brighter posts and new patrol protocols, a reminder to future rangers of choices made in silence. Africa's plains have their own rhythm of danger, but even quiet farmland carries it too. In the early light of South America's forests, the same rule holds. Hunger always finds the edge. It was September 7th, 2015, in Misiones Province, Argentina. The air before dawn was cool and heavy, carrying the damp scent of grass and the faint buzz of insects. The forest edge behind the Ruiz family farm was still dark, but the goat pens near the clearing were alive with restless movement. Esteban Ruiz was 47, a smallholder rancher who had lived his whole life along the same dirt road outside Campo Ramon. He kept goats, a few pigs, and hens, modest stock that supported his wife and 2 teenage sons. Locals respected him for his endurance and his even temper. Unlike some of his neighbors, Esteban rarely used firearms. He believed in scaring predators off rather than killing them, saying that the forest had a right to exist alongside the farms. His shotgun, a rusted single barrel inherited from his father, was more deterrent than weapon. That year was hard. Drought pushed deer and tapirs deeper into the forest, and jaguar sightings rose near the river. 3 weeks earlier, 2 goats were found dead by the drainage ditch. Esteban reinforced the pen with wire and patrolled at night, ignoring his wife's pleas to wait for daylight. He feared hesitation invited risk. The land around his property sloped toward a stream lined with palm and bamboo. Beyond that, the Atlantic forest began, dense, humid, and full of layered sound. At night, mist gathered over the grass and clung to fence posts. The soil was soft, and by morning the prints of possums, armadillos, and dogs marked its surface. The sounds of nocturnal animals carried easily. A sudden shriek, a rustle, then quiet. From the farmhouse, the goat pen sat no more than 50 yards away, enclosed by mesh fencing and a simple wooden gate. Jaguars are apex predators of South America, capable of dragging prey twice their weight. Adult males can reach 7 feet from nose to tail and weigh over 200 pounds. Their bite is among the strongest of any big cat, powerful enough to pierce a skull or crush bone. Normally, jaguars avoid humans, preferring to hunt capybaras, deer, or livestock when natural prey is scarce. But as agricultural clearing expands, the edges of their range blur into farmland, and their patterns change. In such border zones, a startled jaguar may attack defensively rather than flee. For several days before the attack, Esteban's neighbors had spoken of strange prints near the creek and goats refusing to graze near the trees. A forestry officer passing through the village mentioned seeing camera trap footage of a jaguar moving north from a nearby reserve, likely displaced by logging activity. Esteban listened, but continued his nightly rounds. On September 6th, the night before, he told his wife he'd heard something heavier than a dog circling the back fence. She urged him to call the municipal guard, but he shrugged it off, saying it was just passing through. Shortly before dawn, around 5:10 a.m., a neighbor's child awake on the upper floor saw movement in Esteban's yard. A dark form slipping through the lower fence line towards the goat enclosure. Inside the pen, the animals began bleating in confusion. Esteban stepped outside with his flashlight and his old shotgun in hand, wearing only his work shirt and boots. The beam of light caught two green reflections at the far corner of the pen. A low, guttural growl carried through the dark. He advanced slowly, calling to the goats, swinging the light toward the shape. The jaguar had already seized one animal, its body jerking in the shadows. When Esteban shouted and raised his arm, the beam struck the cat's eyes full on. The animal turned, ears flat, and crouched low. Startled, Esteban stepped between the panicking goats and the opening in the fence, waving the flashlight to herd them through. The jaguar lunged, closing the short distance in a single bound. The impact knocked him backward into the post. Witnesses later described the sound, a sharp cry, then the wooden gate slamming against its frame. The child who'd been watching screamed for her father, who ran outside and triggered the town's emergency siren. Within minutes, several men from nearby homes arrived with sticks and tools, banging on metal pans and shouting to scare the predator. One man fired a warning shot into the air. The jaguar hesitated, tail lashing, before turning and disappearing through the same gap it entered. When the noise faded, Esteban was found near the base of the fence, his flashlight lying a few feet away, beams still faintly glowing across the grass. Several goats huddled against the far corner, unharmed but trembling. He was still breathing when neighbors reached him, but died before the local medic arrived. Deep puncture wounds on his shoulder and neck confirmed a single, powerful strike, typical of a jaguar's killing behavior. Authorities handled the case quietly. Local news gave it a few lines, noting the prints found near the stream. Camera traps later showed a lone male jaguar moving through, already gone by week's end. The community raised funds to rebuild the Ruiz fence and add solar lights. Forestry officials launched a small livestock protection program. Esteban's widow received a simple plaque. After that, no one patrolled the pens alone before dawn. Thanks for watching. Enjoy this video? Click more